Welcome everyone. Today we have Tracy Chang with us. Tracy, thank you so much for your time and welcome to Hangeo.
Yeah, thanks, Bessie. It's great to be here.
I'd love to touch upon your relationship with your grandmother because from what I understand, she had restaurants when you were growing up and that was your first introduction to food. And much like me, I also come from a restaurant industry. I'm not trained like you are, and you've had incredible training, but food was also such a big factor in our family and with my great grandmother and my grandmother and now my mom. So, what was it for you to want to go into the restaurant industry, seeing your grandmother in restaurants?
I think, a lot of it is probably the naive part as a kid of not seeing a lot of the, background noise and challenges, but definitely seeing all the positive aspects, right? Like being able to cook alongside her, learning how to make, these nostalgic foods from Taiwan and Japan, whether it was in her home or in her restaurant. And then, just at the restaurant, being able to do so many different things that piqued my interest as, like an under 10-year-old, right? Like I could scoop green tea ice cream for people if I wanted to. I could make Shirley temples at the bar, play with the cashier and learn how to like swipe credit cards. And seeing her really build community as an immigrant who came here from Taiwan, knowing not the language, knowing no one but her family here, and wanting to really create a space that was safe, a space that was fun and delicious, for for immigrants.
My mom had a hard time in the late 90s, early 2000s, opening her restaurant as an immigrant woman. So, what was that experience? I can't, for me, seeing my mom's experience being an independent restaurateur is incredibly empowering because I can see that a woman can do it. But, growing up for her, I cannot imagine the hardships. Also, like you said, not knowing the language, not being from here. So, how was it when there were hardships?
For her, English was a second language, even though she spoke so many other languages. She actually never learned English. And so she definitely leaned a lot on her children. She had, 5 children, and thankfully, because she was the matriarch that she was, those 5 children listened to her and they all stayed in this area. They weren't, scattered like my cousins and I are now with folks in, West Coast and abroad. Yeah, so her 5 children really helped her with the business. But it was incredible, to hear and to see her, kind of face those challenges and run a successful business and ultimately be able to retire. And she had no restaurant industry experience prior to this. She just really loved to cook and to cook at home. And no culinary degree. She was a midwife her entire life in Taiwan, and she was the breadwinner for the family. My grandfather played a lot of mahjong, but I never saw him work a day in his life. And they came from super humble beginnings. And, because my aunt, her eldest child, came here originally with $50 in her pocket, knew one person in Texas, first came to Texas. Okay, then knew another friend in New York, went to New York. Okay, then knew another friend in Boston and eventually came to Boston and then brought the rest of the family here. So, it really is this, American dream kind of story. And, of all kinds of businesses for immigrants to open, for some reason, they chose restaurant, right? They chose food and drink and hospitality. And I think she just had that in her innately to want to take care of other people. So she did pass before I opened my restaurant. So there's so many things I've always wanted to ask her about how she did things or how she managed people or, just so many questions. But what was really nice was my cousin had this eulogy for her. And I remember he described this interview that he had done with her for this class project. And he said that grandmother, she wasn't a fisherman. She wasn't a butcher. but she always had the best fish and the best meat to eat. And it was because back in Taiwan, she had this orange tree in her yard. And the neighbors, the community would gather around this orange tree, and people would have oranges, and they would also come here to kind of exchange the things that they did have. And it was a really just wonderful metaphor for, just how she was as a community leader and how she eventually ran her business here in Cambridge. And, even though I haven't ever been able to ask her about that, I try and carry that with me every day and try and do some semblance of having the orange tree at Pagu in Cambridge.
That orange tree story is so beautiful because you give and you receive and you're sharing. And, we'll get into a couple of things that you did during the pandemic. It's not a couple of little things, huge things that you did during the pandemic, but I believe that you really are, living that lesson, that life lesson of giving back and creating community. So, that's congratulations, because having that as a matriarch example is just wonderful. It sounds like a beautiful, beautiful relationship. And so I wanted to ask, when you were a young adult, and you were deciding, okay, I'm going to go to college, or, a teenager, go to college and get my education, you went to school for finance, but you still ended up in the restaurant industry. So how was that path for you? You always just want to end up in the restaurant industry, or did you think finance was going to support you because of what you saw in your family? Or
for the three kids, I'm the youngest of three. I have two older brothers. But of course, for all of us, they wished that we could, go to college, that we could go get our master's, or, go seek further education after that. And I originally thought, oh, okay, like I will be like my dad and I will go into medicine. During college, when I actually gained some experience as a receptionist in the medical field, I saw how kind of broken the system was. And there's there's several instances I remember, but one that really sticks with me. And it was, I had let a patient come in and they didn't have an appointment and they didn't have insurance. And it was this teenager who seemed like they really needed some help, and just, they weren't like in an emergency situation in terms of like they weren't bleeding out, right? But this person comes to the office, comes to this pediatric office and needs help, wants to see a doctor, and didn't have insurance. And so, I had them wait in the waiting room. I let the nurses and the doctors know. And by the time the doctor found out and actually saw the patient and then found out that they didn't have insurance, I had gotten scolded for letting this patient in. And as a 16-year-old at the time, I was like, I know that this isn't wrong. And I know that this person needed help. And even if that help is a 10, 15-minute consultation with a medical professional, or, maybe it's not even the doctor, but it's a nurse or a nurse practitioner or whoever, it's just basic human nature to listen to someone and to, take them in and try and find them the help that they need. And so, that really sat with me as something that I saw that I probably could not change in my lifetime. And that really irked me. And I was like, how am I going to be, some kind of change making like surgeon in the OR if the people that we are serving are just the people that we can, afford to serve? Yeah. So, my mom said, well, if that's how you feel about things, then it doesn't sound like you'll ever really be able to work for anyone. Like you're always going to find the flaws of working for other people under their rules, in their systems. And so maybe you should consider being an entrepreneur.
it sounds like you also had like a good family support system, right? But for those of us that out there that may not have that family support system, to take the leap and say, okay, I don't like this. I have to be honest with myself and I have to change the circumstance. It's doable, right? I think that with more age, with more age, Jesus. Well, I am getting older, but as I get older, I realize that in my youth, I was always so scared of not following the right path.
Mm,
So it's refreshing to hear that you yourself were confident enough to say, no, I really won't be able to do this. And
yeah.
they had the support. But for anyone watching, it's just, yeah, even if you are in college right now and you don't know what you want to do, it's okay to
Mm,
change, to really become aware of
yeah.
what you like and what you don't like.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
mean, it sounds so much easier now, but I'm sure if we look back at that time, like like you, was definitely like, wait, but I'm on this track, right? This is going to throw me off track and this is going to take more time, etc. Like I had older, wiser friends who always told me like, hey, maybe you should take a gap year. Hey, like maybe you should try taking, a semester of just classes you enjoy versus what you need to graduate, et cetera. Right. And I'm like, oh, but I will fall behind. And I've like always felt like I'm behind in whatever I'm doing, like even in pivoting, right? Like my path to being a finance major or, like going into food and restaurant and whatnot. Like I always felt like the underdog. But yeah, like looking back now and having friends, with kids who are at that age, whether it's them like taking their SATs or applying to schools or graduating from college and figuring out what's next, just or even, like older friends who are like becoming like career changers at this moment, right? Especially during COVID. Um, yeah, I think the bigger takeaway is like this isn't going to happen just once in your life. This is going to be something that perhaps comes up once, twice, three, 4 or 5 times. Um, but to be cognizant enough and also just brave enough to know that things will be okay and
welcome.
to
Yeah.
follow your gut, right? Follow your gut and really dig deep to figure out like what it is that you want to do and work towards figuring out a way to do that versus just, like what other people want you to do or what it is that you studied or, like the sunk cost analysis of being like, well, I just spent like 4 years studying for this, so I better do it.
Yeah.
Right. Not if you're miserable.
Exactly. And so that gut brought you to Paris, where you studied at Le Cordon Bleu, and then you went to Spain to get a scholar. We got a scholarship at a 3-star Michelin or 3 Michelin star restaurant. Like, I mean, talk about following your gut, and it leads you to a good place, right? So I can imagine that you felt much better with your decision of doing something that you actually felt passionate about, like that you wanted to do because what you just said, you enjoyed it. And so when you come back into Boston, you were able to incorporate your experience in Paris, working at a highly rated restaurant in Spain, and your finance background to create a very unique restaurant. So when you were putting everything together, all of these experiences after years of leaving Boston and having food knowledge and training and coming back here and wanting to open a restaurant, what did people think? Because I'm always so interested in others' views because for us it makes sense, right? Like, oh yeah, this is going to work somehow because I believe in
Mm,
it. But then when you're actually putting it together and having to put a business plan and maybe get a business loan and finding a place and putting a menu together and all of those things, it's like, oh, others don't see what I see.
before going to Europe, I worked at Oh Yeah for a year. And, I had somehow convinced the owners that, the restaurant industry was for me. I was really interested in what they were doing. I was very dedicated to, like precision and, like fine dining cuisine and like avant-garde, very modern takes on sushi that they do. And I realized that, kind of their management style was like, oh yeah, like people kind of, they let people do what they want. It's like a little bit passive aggressive. Like no one's yelling at anyone. And I'm like, really? But I heard restaurants, like I read a few books, I talked to a few friends. And I was like, yeah, but I hear it's like way more intense than this. I hear like you're supposed to get like burns and cuts and yelled at, and that's why I went to Europe. And it's weird, right? It's weird that you would want to go to Europe to have that kind of training. But I found it very useful. Like it's not the type of leadership that I practice, but it's a type of training that has made me like a very disciplined, a very like exigent person in the positive aspects. But again, like my mom said, like go learn from other people and you'll probably learn a lot more about what not to do than you think, than you will about, like what's the right thing to do. And that way you'll be able to build, like your idea, your style, your, like leadership style really from there. And she was right.
Surprise, moms are always right.
Yeah.
That's very insightful, because if one of the things that we need right now is to learn, right? The importance of education, of learning somebody else's viewpoints, right? And that's the only way where we're actually going to make an educated decision of what type of leader I want to be, what type of business do I want to have. So I think that's very accurate. Without knowing what it is, we can't really make an educated judgment or a complete judgment. And so you open your restaurant and it's been very successful, thank goodness. How does that feel like after such a path? That now you can say, yeah, I'm a restaurateur, not just a woman in business with a finance degree and this incredible family life experience.
It's interesting that you're like, oh yeah, it's like you guys are very successful. Maybe it's this like underdog mentality that I always carry, that I feel like, okay, like we have had glimmers of success versus like we are established, we know who we are, we have, like these recipes and systems that work and we are successful, and I could just like walk away any day and this will run on its own. But I must say, like COVID has given me like a whole new perspective on what it means to be a successful restaurant business, what it means to be a successful business owner, or even just a responsible one.
Yeah.
And it definitely has me reflecting and hitting that reset button of, like, what kind of business owner do I want to be? Or like, what am I doing? And who am I, right? Like, what am I doing with my life? And like, what really is my impact in this community? I thought I had really laid that out in my business plan. And I thought I had really hit some milestones, right? But COVID has made me realize that like I haven't. And there's a lot more work to be done.
Just one thing that I wanted to specify, you said culturally aware food boxes. Why is that important?
Yeah, so like being on the ground was really important to understand like how people are living, what they're going through, what they really need. And so a few of the times when I had done deliveries to a few different food banks, one of which was like in Revere, another one in Cambridge, I saw just like a lot of the stuff that was being donated or rescued, high sodium, high sugar, last forever kinds of foods. Yeah. And I was like, I don't know if people like want to be eating that stuff right now.
Part of the question, right? It's like even when it's a donation, it's still integrity based, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to eat it. Why do I assume someone else wants to eat it? And what is this person like, what is their diet like? And it's
Yeah.
tough, right? Because you want to help. Everybody wants to help. Yes, I made a donation. I want to be involved. But that's the hard part. And I think this is the beauty of making it culturally conscious that you're
Yeah.
talking about.
Well, especially during times of despair, right? Like think about any time you've been like at home with a cold. Like, what do you want to eat? You want to eat something familiar, right? You want to eat something that makes you feel good, that helps, like nurse you back to health. And that probably isn't like Mountain Dew or corned beef hash or,
Spam.
like Smucker's jelly. Sorry. And so my role, like, was just that, was figuring out, getting feedback from folks who receive the foods, if that's enough food, if that's what they want to eat. And it was a different, definition of being a chef and a different definition of being a restaurant. And we definitely thought long and hard about creating the name Project Restore Us. And we really went back to the root of restaurant, which means to restore. And we thought, oh, how perfect. Like, if we are trying to restore the livelihoods of people in need, with the foods that we're providing,
Mhm.
you know, that's what a restaurant should be doing.
You saw a need, right? And like you said, you're not a small size restaurant, you're not a large size restaurant, you're a mid-sized restaurant, but you still chose to do something. And I think that's the basis of it, that one person can indeed do something, can affect positive change. Because you didn't have to like go, far and wide, writing letters to the president or trying to contact your state representative. You literally went around in your circle of friends and you reached, like you said, your contacts, right? It's like, what are you doing? How can we get together and do more? So, for someone that's starting to think, okay, I want to help my community, or I want to provide assistance in some shape or form that my community needs right now, where did you get that strength or inspiration or courage from, to say, yeah, it's worth asking, it's worth checking.
I think it's really from listening before acting, and listening so that you can understand like what exactly is the need. Because I felt like, there was almost a bit of naivete on, like, in our first initiative, right? In feeding frontline healthcare workers, we're like, oh yeah, like this is a need. And it certainly was. Um, was it the biggest need? Like food insecurity was a thing before COVID started, right? Um, and it's not like we started an initiative to address food insecurity. Like we started an initiative to feed frontline healthcare workers. But the feedback that we got was super valuable and, really opened our eyes to the more vulnerable populations and how they needed our help and how they will continue to need our help even after the first wave, the second wave, the third wave. Who knows when this pandemic will be, quote unquote, over, right? But it's going to, with all its variants, is going to be a part of our lives for a long time. And that means that, these immigrant essential workers will be hurting for a long time. And it just really made me more aware about how, as a small business operator, paying fair wages, creating a positive environment, providing benefits, paid, time off, earned time, sick time, all that stuff, like doing things by the books for these people is only like a small fraction of what you can do for the immigrant community. If we have enough at home, if we have more than enough at home, then shouldn't we be figuring out how to share that or how to help others who don't have what we have?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people like ask me why I didn't just close my restaurant and become a stay-at-home mom or hibernate during the winter and, not try and do so many different things. And I don't know, I guess my answer is like, but what, like, why would I do that? Like, I have help at home. I have, so much support here with my family, and my family can help me with my kids. But what about all these other people who are hurting out there? And because I was on the grounds making some of these deliveries myself and meeting some of these people and talking to them, and I delivered this one time to this house in Lynn, and it was this house full of all these children. And these children were separated from their parents at the border. And they were all living together in Lynn. And I'm like, geez, it's like they don't like deserve any of that, right? And on top of that, like COVID hit,
Yeah.
right? And now, like their lives are like changed forever, right? And it's like the least I can do is figure out a model that gets these kids food so that they have food on the table, and it's food that they know that they like, that's good for them. That's the least I can do.
Yeah, it's empathy. That's what I think it boils down to. It's just empathy. From the whole conversation, and sincerely, it's been just such a delight to talk to you and hear so many different takeaways and views on how one person, again, can actually do something positive for their community just by reaching out and asking, how can I help? What do I do? How can we get together and do something? So I'd like to ask you just a simple definition. How would you define community?
I think community is, not just the people in the room. It is, it's all of those around us, right? It's the immediate local community, but it's also the greater public. And my dad always mentioned to me as a kid that I should try and do good and do it locally, right? For my community. It's like, okay, what does that mean? Right. And maybe that means that's for my small business, that's for my town, my city that, I live in, or that I work in. But it's this industry, right? It is this entire like restaurant industry that if we want this industry to be resilient and to be around for the longer term, if we want restaurants to still be here after the pandemic, then we need to think bigger picture, that our actions have consequences and that the community is greater than just our restaurant. So the change, the impact, the systems, the ideas that we have, we want to make that, all available, all shareable to folks that are in Boston, in Cambridge, but also beyond.
It comes back down to it. Everything that you do actually has a ripple effect. So thank you for that feedback and that sharing of your experiences. It has been very, very wonderful to hear how you are making change in your community, which is actually rippling out to other communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Bessie.
Of course.